The Duchess of Ashwood arrived at the altar in white silk and shattered grace. The congregation rose, the organ thundered. The bishop smiled with practiced benevolence, and the Duke of Ravencrest stood frozen at the end of the aisle, his hands clasped behind his back, his face carved from marble. She could not read his expression from that distance. She had never been able to read him. 3 years of marriage, and her husband remained a stranger wrapped in titles and silence. She had learned his routines, his silences, the weight of his footsteps on the staircase at midnight, but she had never learned his heart. Her father walked her down the aisle, his grip tight, his pride visible. The ceremony was meant to be a renewal, a public reaffirmation of vows that had been whispered in a cold chapel years ago, witnessed only by servants and a priest paid to forget. Now the kingdom watched. Now the nobility leaned forward in their velvet pews, hungry for a glimpse of the Duchess who had tamed the untamable Duke. They believed the lie. They believed she was the only woman who had ever captured him. She believed it herself once. She reached the altar. He took her hand. His fingers were cold, his grip mechanical. He did not look at her eyes. He looked at the cathedral ceiling, the stained glass, the carved angels watching from the stonework. The bishop began the ancient words, "Do you, Alistair, Duke of Ravencrest, take this woman—" The great doors of the cathedral swung open. Light flooded the nave. The congregation turned. The bishop stopped mid-sentence. A woman stood in the doorway. She wore a travelling gown, mud-spattered, her hair escaping its pins, her face pale and beautiful and terrible with purpose. A child clung to her hand, a boy of perhaps 3 with dark hair and sharp cheekbones and eyes that mirrored the Duke's exactly. The Duchess of Ashwood felt her husband's hand go rigid in hers. She looked at his face, really looked, for the first time in 3 years. He was not frozen with fear. He was frozen with recognition. The woman in the doorway stepped forward. The congregation parted like water before a ship. The bishop lowered his prayer book. The organist stopped playing, his hands hovering over the keys, unsure whether to continue or flee. The Duchess of Ashwood released her husband's hand. She did not know why. She only knew that something in her had already understood long before this moment, long before the doors opened, long before the truth walked into the light. She had known from the cold nights, the empty rooms, the way his eyes never quite met hers in the morning. She had known from the servants' whispers, the sealed drawer in his study, the portrait that had once hung in the eastern wing and then vanished, leaving only a darker rectangle on the wallpaper. She had known, and now the knowing became seeing. The woman reached the altar. "Alistair," she said, and her voice was not loud, but it carried through the silent cathedral, like a bell tolling in winter. "I told you I would come back. You did not believe me." 3 years ago, the Duke of Ravencrest had stood in this same cathedral and married the woman who now stood beside him. The Duchess of Ashwood, then Lady Margaret of Harrowfield, had been 17 years old, innocent, trembling, madly in love with a man she barely knew. She had learned the word transaction within a week of the wedding night. She had learned the word obligation within a month, and she had learned the word mistress only now, in this moment, as the woman at the altar revealed herself not as a stranger, but as a ghost from her husband's past, a ghost he had buried in silence but never exorcised. "I have your son," the woman said. "His name is Thomas. He has your mother's eyes and your temper. He has asked me every night for 3 years where his father is. I have told him you are dead." The Duke of Ravencrest did not speak. He did not deny. He did not defend. The Duchess of Ashwood looked at her husband's profile, the strong jaw, the high cheekbones, the mouth that had kissed her forehead exactly once on their wedding night, as if she were a child to be comforted rather than a wife to be loved. She had known something was missing. She had told herself it was her fault, that she was too young, too plain, too quiet, that if she tried harder, became better, learned to play the lute, embroider flowers, speak French, manage the household, smile more frequently, and swallow her sorrow more deeply, he would eventually look at her with something warmer than obligation. She had read every book in his library, learned the names of every tenant on his estates, memorized the lineages of every noble family in the kingdom. She had transformed herself into a duchess worthy of his name, and he had never once asked her who she was before she became his, because he had never wanted to know, because his heart had already been given, years ago, to a woman who stood in the doorway of a cathedral with his illegitimate child in her hand. "I am sorry, Margaret," the Duke said, turning to his wife. His words were careful, measured, the words of a man who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind, who had prepared for exposure, who had made peace with disgrace. I never meant for you to find out this way. The Duchess of Ashwood could not decide whether to laugh or scream, so she did neither. She stood perfectly still, her white dress absorbing the light from the stained glass windows, her face a mask that mirrored all the masks he had worn for 3 years. You never meant for me to find out, she repeated slowly. Yes. You never meant for me to find out that you had been in love with another woman before you married me. Yes. You never meant for me to find out that you had a child. Yes. You never meant for me to find out that you have been living a lie since the day we met. The Duke opened his mouth, closed it, because there was no answer that would not damn him. The woman in the travelling gown, Eleanor, her name was Eleanor, the Duchess learned this later from servants who had always known and never told, stepped forward and placed herself between the Duke and the altar. He promised me, Eleanor said, looking at the Duchess now, not as an enemy but as a fellow wounded animal, that he would end your engagement before the wedding, that he would send you home with a settlement and an apology, that he would come to me and raise our son together. The Duchess of Ashwood felt the world narrow to a single point of clarity. And he did not. No, Eleanor said, he did not. He married me instead. Yes. He brought me to Ravencrest, gave me a ring, shared his bed, and never once told me that there was a woman in the shadows with his child in her arms. Eleanor's voice broke, just slightly. I wrote to him. Every month for 2 years. He never answered. I thought he was dead. I thought he had been killed in a hunting accident, or taken by illness, or struck by a carriage on the London road. I searched the newspapers. I asked travellers. No one could tell me what had happened to the Duke of Ravencrest. Because he was with me, the Duchess said. Because he was with you, Eleanor agreed. The two women looked at each other across the altar, across the ruined ceremony, across 3 years of silence and secrets, and the men who had chosen to protect their own comfort rather than tell the truth. The bishop cleared his throat. My Lord Duke, perhaps we should adjourn to a more private— No, the Duchess of Ashwood said. She had never interrupted a bishop before. She had never interrupted anyone, but something had broken inside her, and from the brokenness came a clarity she had never known. I want to hear everything, she said. Margaret, the Duke began. Sit down, Alistair. He sat. The congregation gasped. The Duke of Ravencrest, the cold, the untouchable, the powerful, sat down on the step of the altar like a schoolboy caught stealing. The Duchess did not look at him. She looked at Eleanor. How long were you together before the wedding? Eleanor's hands were trembling. She pressed them together to still them, the motion unconscious and heartbreaking. 7 years. 7 years. 7 years of secret meetings, of stolen nights, of whispered promises in the dark. 7 years of love that the Duke had never once brought into the light. You were his mistress, the Duchess said. I was his first love, Eleanor replied. The words landed like stones in still water. I was his first love, Eleanor repeated. I was the woman he promised to marry before his father threatened to disinherit him. I was the woman he sent away to save his inheritance. I was the woman he swore he would come back for. Eleanor paused. Her voice dropped. I am the woman he abandoned. The Duke's head bowed. You were a servant, the Duchess said. I was the housekeeper's daughter. He was the Duke. His father told him that marriage to me would ruin his family's name, his political prospects, his place in the kingdom. He gave me money. He gave me promises. He gave me a child. Eleanor's hand moved to the boy's shoulder. And then he gave me nothing. The boy, Thomas, looked up at his mother with solemn eyes. He did not understand the words, but he understood the tears. 7 years. 7 years of secret meetings and a child raised in silence. If this story is pulling at something inside you, if you know what it means to wait for love that never came, then subscribe, because this Duke's reckoning has only just begun. Tell me in the comments, would you have waited for him, or would you have walked away the moment he chose another? 7 years, the Duchess repeated. You waited 7 years. I was not waiting, Eleanor said. I was surviving. I was raising his son in a cottage on the edge of his estate, watching him marry another woman from my window, learning to hate the man I loved. She paused. But hatred is not the opposite of love. Indifference is, and I have never been indifferent to him. The Duchess of Ashwood felt the words in her chest like a wound she had always carried, because she understood. She had been married to the Duke for 3 years, and she had never once been indifferent to him. She had loved him with the desperate, consuming love of a woman who who had been given nothing and hoped for everything. She had waited for him to look at her the way he had looked at this other woman. She had waited for him to touch her with passion instead of duty. She had waited, and now she knew she would wait forever. "Alistair," Eleanor said, turning to the Duke, "I did not come here to humiliate you. I did not come here to destroy your marriage. I came here because Thomas asked me where his father was for the 100th time, and I could not lie to him again." She knelt down beside her son. "This is your father, Thomas. He is the Duke of Ravencrest. He is a powerful man, and he has been a coward." The boy looked at the Duke. He did not smile. He did not run to him. He simply looked, with the clear, knowing eyes of a child who had already learned that the world could not be trusted. The Duchess of Ashwood sat in the dim attic, hunched over a worn leather chest that had been hidden between broken furniture and moth-eaten tapestries for 3 years. She had found the chest by accident. No, not by accident. She had found it because the housekeeper, a woman who had served Ravencrest for 40 years, had told her about it the night before the ceremony. "I cannot live with another lie," the housekeeper had whispered, her hands trembling around a cup of tea. "I have watched you suffer for 3 years, Your Grace. I have watched him suffer. I have watched everyone suffer, and I cannot keep the truth buried any longer." The truth was in this chest. The Duchess opened the lid. Inside were dozens of letters, neatly stacked, tied with a faded ribbon, all addressed to her, all sealed. All stamped, but never sent. She picked up the one on top. It was dated the night she had arrived at Ravencrest, the night of her wedding. She opened it with hands that did not shake, because she had stopped shaking the moment Eleanor walked through the cathedral doors. The shock had passed. The grief was waiting beneath the surface, patient as a tide, but for now there was only the strange, hollow clarity of knowing. She read, "To my wife, Margaret, no." That was not the first line. The first line had been crossed out, ink bleeding through the paper. Words struck through with such force that the quill had torn the surface. "To the woman I married, crossed out. To Margaret, crossed out." The letter began properly on the 4th attempt, as if he had been trying to find a name for her that did not feel like a betrayal. "I am writing this at midnight. The servants are asleep, the candles are burning low, and I am sitting in my study, trying to find the words to tell you the truth that I should have told you before I said I do. There was a woman before you. I loved her. I still love her. I will probably love her until the ground is shoveled over me, and my name is carved into a stone I will never see. I should have told you this before the ceremony. I was a coward. I am still a coward. I am writing this letter because I am too afraid to speak it aloud, and even if I gave it to you, I know I would not have the courage to watch you read it." The Duchess stopped. Her hands were shaking now. She continued reading. "I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not expect you to understand. I do not expect anything except your anger, which you have earned, and your sorrow, which I have caused, and your contempt, which I deserve. But I want you to know this. I married you out of duty. But I have not touched you out of duty. Every time I held your hand, it was because I chose to. Every time I stood beside you at a ball, it was because I wanted to be seen with you. Every time I watched you sleep, and I have watched you sleep more times than you know, it was because I could not look away. I do not know what love is anymore. I thought I knew. I thought it was Eleanor, and then I lost her, and I thought I would never feel it again. But you—" The sentence broke off. There was a line drawn through the next paragraph, black ink, obscuring whatever he had written. Then it resumed. "I do not know if this is love. I do not know if I am capable of love anymore. But I know that when you walked down the aisle today, something in me cracked open. And I know that I am writing this letter not because I want to confess, but because I want to be known. I want you to know me, all of me, the cruel parts, the cowardly parts, the parts that have been broken so long that I do not remember what it felt like to be whole. I want you to know that I am terrified of losing you, and I want you to know that I am terrified of keeping you, because keeping you means lying to you, and lying to you means slowly poisoning everything good that could exist between us. I do not know what to do. I have always known what to do. I am a duke. I am trained to decide, to command, to control. But I do not know how to tell you the truth without losing you. And I cannot lose you, Margaret. I cannot." The letter ended there. No signature, no closing words, just the confession laid bare and then silence. The Duchess placed the letter down. She picked up the second in the stack. It was dated 3 months after the wedding. "I saw you in the garden today. You were picking roses. You did not see me watching from the window. You looked, I do not have the words, you looked like something I had no right to possess. I have stopped visiting Eleanor. I have written to her, telling her that I cannot see her anymore. This morning I burned the letter, because sending it means ending something, and I am not strong enough to end anything. I want to choose you. But I do not know how. The third letter, 6 months after the wedding. Eleanor's son was born last night. I received word from a servant. I did not go to her. I sat in my study and drank until I could not stand, because I knew that if I went to her, I would never come back to you. I hate myself, not because I love her. I will always love her in some way, the way you always loved the first person who taught you what love could be, but because I have not told you, because I am letting you build a life on a foundation of silence. The fourth letter, 9 months after the wedding. You asked me tonight if I was happy. I lied. I told you I was. The truth is that I do not know what happiness is anymore. I spend my days with you, and I feel something that I refuse to name, because naming it means admitting that I could have loved you all along if I had not been too broken to try. I do not deserve you, but I am too selfish to let you go. The fifth letter, 1 year after the wedding. I read your diary. I should not have. I know I should not have. But I came home late, and you had fallen asleep in the library, and the book was open on your lap, and I saw my name. You wrote, I gave him everything. He gave me nothing. And still, somehow, I love him. I closed the book. I walked out. I sat in the garden for 2 hours in the rain because I could not face you after reading those words. You love me, and I have given you nothing. I am going to try. I am going to try to give you something. I do not know what. I do not know if I am capable, but I am going to try. The Duchess turned to the 6th letter. It was dated 2 years after the wedding, 1 year before today. I came to your room last night. I stood at your door with my hand raised to knock. I had practiced words in my head. I was going to tell you about Eleanor. I was going to tell you about Thomas. I was going to tell you everything, but I heard you crying through the door, and I could not bring myself to add to your sorrow. So I walked away, and I hate myself for it. I hate myself more than I have ever hated anyone, because you deserve the truth, and I am too weak to give it to you. The 7th letter, dated 3 weeks ago. I am going to tell you the truth on the day of our renewal ceremony. I have decided. I will tell you in front of everyone. I will tell you in front of God. I will not hide anymore. I have never been brave, Margaret, but I am going to try to be brave for you. The Duchess stared at the final words. He had planned to tell her. He had been holding the truth for 3 years, carrying it like a weight that grew heavier every day, and he had finally decided to set it down. But he had not done it. He had come to the cathedral, seen her in the white dress, felt her hand in his, and lost his nerve. And Eleanor had done it for him. She set the letter down. Her hands were no longer shaking. She did not know if she was grateful or furious or something in between. She only knew that she had spent 3 years loving a man who had been writing her confessions in the dark, hiding them in a chest, never giving them to her. She felt a strange grief for the woman who had waited for those letters. That woman had been her. That woman had been the young Duchess who had stood at the altar, full of hope, not knowing that her husband's heart was already broken and filled with words he could not speak. She picked up the last letter at the bottom of the chest. The ink was smudged, as if by tears. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. I know you will not read this. I know this chest will remain locked, and these letters will gather dust, and you will never know that I loved you. Because I do. Love you. I have loved you since the night you fell asleep in my study, curled in my chair, clutching a book to your chest like it was the only warmth you had. I loved you when you learned the names of every tenant on the estate. I loved you when you planted roses in the garden I had neglected for years. I loved you when you smiled at me across a ballroom, even though I did not smile back. I have loved you in every moment that I failed to show you, and I have failed, again and again. I have failed you so many times that I have lost count. I have failed Eleanor. I have failed Thomas. I have failed everyone who ever trusted me. But I am going to make it right. I am going to find you. I am going to tell you everything, and I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn the love I should have cherished from the first day. The Duchess of Ashwood closed the chest. She sat in the silence of the attic, surrounded by dust and forgotten things, holding the last letter in her hands. The ink was smudged. The words were desperate, and they had never been sent. But she had read them. She had found them. She had uncovered the truth that her husband had hidden away, not because he wanted to deceive her, but because he had been too afraid to let her see the broken, uncertain, trembling man behind the Duke's mask. She heard footsteps on the staircase. She did not turn, The footsteps stopped at the attic door. "I thought I would find you here." His voice. The Duke's voice. She sat holding those unsent words. If this story has already wrapped itself around your heart, the way these letters wrapped around hers, subscribe now so you never miss another hidden confession or shattered mask. And in the comments, tell me honestly, did you suspect the Duke's letters existed all along, or did this discovery catch you as breathless as it caught her? She had heard it in the cathedral, speaking carefully measured lies. She had heard it in the carriage ride home, filled with awkward silences. She had heard it in the conversations with the household, crisp and commanding, but she had never heard it like this. Quiet, unsure, afraid. She turned. The Duke of Ravencrest stood in the doorway, his cravat loosened, his coat wrinkled, his hair dishevelled. He looked nothing like the cold, untouchable man who had stood at the altar. He looked like a man who had been torn open and left to bleed. "Margaret," he said. She held up the letter. "I found them." He flinched. "You were going to tell me," she said. 3 weeks ago. You were going to tell me at the ceremony." "I was." "You did not." "I could not." "Why?" He stepped into the attic. The floorboards groaned under his weight. "Because I looked at you standing at the altar, and I realized that telling you the truth would destroy the only good thing in my life." The Duchess did not soften. "You should have told me 3 years ago." "I know." "Before you married me." "I know." "Before I fell in love with you." He stopped. "Margaret, before I became someone who cannot imagine life without you." She was crying now. She had not meant to cry. She had promised herself she would not cry, not in front of him, not after everything. But the tears came anyway, hot and inevitable, carving paths through the dust on her cheeks. "Every night I waited for you," she said. "Every night I hoped you would come to my room and tell me something real, something true, something that would let me know that I was not just a transaction to you. You were never—" Every morning I woke up and told myself that today would be the day you would look at me like I mattered. Like I was not just the woman you married out of duty, like I was someone you chose. He crossed the room. He took her hands. She let him. Because God help her, she still loved him, even after everything, even after Eleanor, even after the lies and the silence and the years of waiting. "I am not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I am not asking you to understand. I am asking you to stay." "Why?" "Because I cannot live without you." Eleanor said that too. "And you left her." He flinched again. "I know. She spent 7 years waiting for you. I spent 3. We are both women who loved a man who could not choose." He was silent. The truth hung between them, heavy and painful and necessary. "But I am different from Eleanor," the Duchess said. "How?" She pulled her hands free. "Eleanor waited for you in a cottage, raising your son, hoping you would come back. I spent 3 years as your wife, loving you, building a life with you, making myself into someone worthy of you." She paused. "And you taught me something, Alistair. You taught me that I am strong enough to survive losing you." His face went pale. "Margaret, please." "I am leaving." The words fell into the attic like stones into water. "I am going to my family's estate. I am taking nothing. I am leaving you the house, the title, everything. I do not want it." "Where will you go?" "Somewhere you cannot find me." He reached for her. She stepped back. "Those letters," she said, "they showed me the man you could have been. They showed me the love you could have given me. And I am grateful in a strange way because now I know that I was not wrong to love you." "I love you, Margaret." "I know," she said. "I know you do. I read it in every unsent letter. I see it in the way you are looking at me now. You love me. And that is why I have to go." "I do not understand." She smiled, a soft, sad smile. "Because if I stay, I will always wonder if you chose me because you loved me or because I was there. If I stay, I will always be the woman you settled for when you lost the one you wanted. You are not—" "Let me finish." She took a breath. "I read your letters, every single one, and I know that the man who wrote them is a man who was too afraid to be honest. But he is also a man who wanted to be brave, who tried to be brave. He failed." "He failed," she agreed, "but he can try again." She moved toward the attic door. He did not stop her. "I am not leaving you forever," she said. "I am leaving you until you know what you want. until you are certain, until you have buried the ghosts of your past and can look at me without seeing a replacement for someone else. And if I never become certain, she paused at the door, then you know where to find me, or you do not. He watched her descend the staircase. He watched her walk down the hallway. He heard the front door open, and then he heard the sound of a carriage pulling away. He stood alone in the attic, surrounded by dust and the open chest, the letters scattered around his feet. He picked up the one on top, the first one, the one he had written on their wedding night, cradling the words he had been too afraid to speak. And he read it again. To my wife, Margaret. He crossed out the words. He had done it 3 years ago, and he did it again now in his mind, because she had never been his wife in the way he had wanted her to be. She had been his heart, and he had. She had been the woman he had needed, and the woman he had failed. He sank onto the attic floor, the paper crumpling in his fist. 3 years. 3 years of letters he had never sent. 3 years of confessions he had hidden away, hoping that someday he would find the courage to speak them aloud. Someday had never come. He had waited for the perfect moment, the right words, a sign from fate that it was safe to be honest. And while he waited, she had learned to survive without him. The Duchess of Ashwood, no Margaret. She was Margaret once more. Sat in the carriage as the Ravencrest estate shrank behind her. She did not look back. She could not. Because if she looked back, she would see the tower where she had watched the sunrise every morning. The garden where she had planted roses from cuttings her mother had given her. The window of his study, where a light burned at midnight, where he sat writing letters she would never read until it was too late. She pressed her palm against the cold glass of the carriage window. The tears had stopped. She was hollow now, cleaned out. Like a house after a fire, the walls still standing but everything inside reduced to ash. She thought of Eleanor. She thought of the boy, Thomas, with his father's eyes and cheekbones, and the future he would never have. She thought of the Duke of Ravencrest, standing in the attic, surrounded by the confessions he had never dared to give her. She thought of the young woman she had been 3 years ago, the one who had believed in love so fiercely that she had married a stranger. That woman was gone now. She had been killed, slowly, over the course of 1,000 silent mornings and empty dinners and cold nights. But something else was being born in her place, something harder, something sharper, something that would never again wait for a man to choose her. The carriage stopped at the crossroads. The driver turned his head. Your Grace. Where to? She had family. A distant cousin in the north, an aunt in the city, estates she could claim as her own. But she did not want them. She did not want to be the scandalous Duchess who had fled her wedding, the abandoned wife. The woman who had lost her husband to another woman on the altar steps. She wanted to be no one. She wanted to be someone new. Take me to the coast, she said. My lady. The coast. The port town. I will find my way from there. The driver hesitated. It was not proper. It was not safe. A woman traveling alone, without escort, without protection. She met his eyes in the mirror. He saw something in them that made him nod. As you wish, Your Grace. The carriage rolled forward. Margaret watched the countryside pass, the green fields, the stone walls, the small villages where people lived simple lives. She had been raised for this world. She had been trained to be a duchess, a hostess, an ornament in a man's house. She had never been trained to be free. She would learn. 3 years later, the Duke of Ravencrest stood at the window of his study, watching the rain fall on the garden she had planted. The roses were dead. He had not watered them. He had not cared for anything since she left. The household had learned to live with his silence. The servants moved through the halls like ghosts, speaking in whispers, avoiding his gaze. The estate had fallen into disrepair. The tenants had stopped coming to him with their troubles because he could not trouble himself with theirs. He was still the Duke, still powerful, still respected in the cold way that power and title commanded. But everyone knew that the Duke of Ravencrest had lost his wife on the day of their renewal ceremony, that another woman had appeared with his son, that the Duchess had walked out of the cathedral and never returned. Some whispered that she had gone to the continent. Others said she had taken a ship to the colonies. A few claimed she had died of a broken heart, her body never found, her spirit haunting the garden where she had once planted roses. The Duke did not correct them, because he did not know the truth. He had searched for her in the beginning. He had sent riders to every estate, every port, every relative who might take her in. He had offered rewards. He had begged. He had done everything except go himself. He had been too afraid to see the look in her eyes when she turned him away, too afraid to hear her say, "You waited too long." So he had stayed. He had stayed in the attic, surrounded by the letters she had read, the confessions she now carried in her memory. He had stayed in the study, staring at the window where he had watched her leave. He had stayed in the house that was no longer a home, and he had waited. For what? He did not know. For her to return, for forgiveness, for the courage he had never found. But courage did not come to those who waited. It came to those who moved. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a messenger with mud-splattered boots and a seal he did not recognize. The Duke broke the wax with trembling hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The words were not. "Alistair, I am writing to you from a city you have never visited, in a country whose name you would not recognize. I have been traveling for 3 years. I have seen mountains that touch the sky and oceans that stretch beyond the horizon. I have met people who have never heard of the Duke of Ravencrest, who have never knelt to a title, who have never measured a person by their name. I have become one of them. I have become Margaret, not the Duchess of Ashwood, not your wife, just Margaret, and I am happy. I do not say this to hurt you. I say this because I want you to know that I survived, that the woman who left you in the attic is not the same woman who writes this letter. I have buried the girl who waited for you. I have become someone who does not wait. But I have not forgotten you. I have not forgotten the letters. I have not forgotten the man who wrote them, the man who was too afraid to send them. I have not forgotten the love that lived in those pages, even if it was never spoken aloud. I am coming back, not to Ravencrest, not to the house where I learned to be alone. I am coming back to the crossroads where the carriage stopped 3 years ago. I will be there at sunset on the anniversary of the day I left. If you want to find me, you will. If you do not, I will understand. I have spent 3 years learning to let go of the hope that you would choose me. I have learned to let go of many things, but I have not let go of the possibility that you have changed. Have you, Alistair? Have you become the man who can speak the words he writes? I will wait for you at the crossroads, but I will not wait forever. Margaret. The Duke read the letter 3 times. The first time he could not breathe. The second time he could not see through the tears. The third time he stood up. He walked out of the study. He walked down the hall, past the servants who stared, past the portraits of ancestors who judged him from their gilded frames. He walked into the attic, where the chest still sat open, the letters still scattered across the floor. He picked them up, every single one. He carried them down the stairs, into the garden where the roses had died, where the earth was bare and waiting, and he burned them. One by one, he fed the letters into the fire, watching the words curl and blacken and disappear. He did not need them anymore. He had read them 1,000 times. He knew every sentence, every crossed-out word, every confession he had hidden away. He had been carrying them in his heart all along. The last letter crumbled to ash. The Duke of Ravencrest walked to the stables. He saddled his horse himself, refusing the stable boy's help. He mounted. He rode through the gates of the estate without looking back. He had 3 days. 3 days to reach the crossroads. 3 days to become the man who could speak the words he had written. He rode through the night, through the rain, through the doubt that clawed at his chest. He did not stop. He could not stop. Because for the first time in 3 years, he knew exactly where he was going. And he knew exactly who he was going to find. The first night, he rode until his horse stumbled, until the moon was high, and the road had become a pale ribbon winding through unfamiliar countryside. He stopped at an inn, a small place with a creaking sign and smoke rising from the chimney. The innkeeper recognized him. Everyone recognized the Duke of Ravencrest even here, even in the middle of nowhere. "My Lord Duke," the innkeeper said, bowing low, "we are honored. What brings you to—" "A room," the Duke said, "and feed my horse." He did not explain. He did not apologize. He climbed the narrow stairs and sat on the edge of a bed that was too small, too hard, too far from the life he had known. He thought of Margaret. He thought of her face in the attic, the way she had held his letter, the way her tears had fallen without sound. He thought of the 3 years he had wasted, and he realized for the first time that his suffering did not matter. He had suffered, yes. He had grieved. He had sat alone in his study, staring at the garden, convincing himself that he was the victim of his own story. But Margaret had suffered more. She had loved him without knowing if he loved her back. She had waited for confessions he had hidden in a chest. She had stood at the altar, and watched another woman reveal the truth he had been too afraid to speak. Her pain was greater than his, and he owed her everything. The second day, he rode through a storm. The rain came in sheets, soaking through his coat, plastering his hair to his face. Thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning split the clouds, and the road turned to mud beneath his horse's hooves. He did not stop. He could have taken shelter in a village, waited for the storm to pass, arrived at the crossroads dry and composed and proper. But he had been proper for 30 years. Proper had cost him everything. He pressed forward. The mud sucked at the horse's legs. The wind howled through the trees. The rain blurred his vision until he could barely see the road ahead, and still he rode, because Margaret had waited for him in the rain. She had waited for 3 years. He could wait through one storm. The third day, he arrived at the crossroads. He arrived early. The sun was still high, the sky clear, the road dry after the storm. He dismounted and stood at the center of the intersection, looking down each of the 4 roads. The road he had come from led back to Ravencrest, back to the cold halls and the empty garden and the life he had built on silence. The road ahead led to the coast, to the port town where she had first found her freedom. The road to the left led to the estates of the northern nobility, the world of balls and titles and transactions dressed as love. And the road to the right, he had ridden through a storm for her. This is the moment every choice narrows to a single road. Subscribe to witness if that road leads to redemption or to ruin. Tell us in the comments. When he says he owes her everything, do you believe he has truly earned her forgiveness? Or is this just another promise he will break? He did not know where that road led. He had never taken it. He had always chosen the safe road, the known road, the road that everyone expected him to take. Not anymore. He sat down on the grass at the edge of the crossroads, his back against a stone marker, his eyes on the horizon. He would wait. He would wait as she had waited. He would wait until the sun set, until the stars came out, until she appeared or did not appear. And if she came, he would speak. If she did not come, he would follow. Because he had stopped running from the truth. He had stopped hiding from his own heart. The sun began to sink. The sky turned orange, then pink, then a deep, bruised purple. The Duke watched the horizon, his hands steady, his breath even. He did not know if she would come. He did not know if she had forgiven him or if she could ever forgive him, or if forgiveness was even something he deserved. But he knew that he had to try. He had to stand at the crossroads, exposed and vulnerable, with nothing to offer except the truth. He had practiced the words 100 times on the ride. He would tell her that he had burned the letters, not because he wanted to forget, but because he no longer needed them. He had memorized every word. He had internalized every confession. The letters had been his crutch, his excuse for silence. He had hidden behind them for 3 years, telling himself that someday he would find the courage to speak them aloud. Someday was here. He would speak. He would tell her that he loved her, not as a replacement for Eleanor, not as a duty, not as a transaction. He loved her as himself, as the man he had become because of her. He would tell her that he had spent 3 years learning to be worthy of her. He would tell her that he was still learning. And then he would ask her to let him learn beside her. The sun touched the horizon. The first stars appeared. And the Duke of Ravencrest, who had spent his entire life waiting for the perfect moment, realized that perfection did not exist. There was only the moment, and the moment was now. He stood up. He looked down the road to the coast, the road she had taken 3 years ago. She was not coming. He knew it with the certainty of a man who had finally stopped lying to himself. She had told him she would not wait forever, and she had not. He had spent 3 years waiting for courage, and in those 3 years, she had learned to live without him. He had lost her, not because she had stopped loving him, but because he had stopped trying. He stood at the crossroads, the night settling around him, the wind cold against his face. He could go back. He could return to Ravencrest, to the silence, to the life he had built on regret. Or he could go forward. He could follow the road to the coast, find the port town, search for her. He could spend the rest of his life looking for her, if that was what it took. He could become a man who did not wait. He took a step forward, then another. He walked down the road to the coast, the road she had taken, the road he should have taken 3 years ago. He did not look back. He did not need to. The past was behind him, buried in the ashes of his letters, buried in the garden where her roses had died, buried in the attic where he had hidden his heart. The future was ahead. And for the first time in his life, the Duke of Ravencrest was not afraid of what he would find there. He walked through the night. The road stretched before him, pale in the moonlight, winding through fields and forests and villages where candles flickered in windows. He passed them all. He did not stop. He did not rest. He had rested for 3 years, and rest had cost him everything. Dawn broke over the coast. He saw the sea for the first time, grey and vast and endless, stretching to a horizon he could not cross. The port town sprawled along the shore, a tangle of narrow streets and stone buildings and ships with their masts swaying in the morning breeze. He stopped at the top of the hill. He had no plan. He had no certainty. He had only the desperate hope that she was here, somewhere in the maze of streets and strangers, living a life he had not been part of. He descended into the town. He asked at the first inn. No one knew her name. He asked at the second, the third, the fourth. He described her face, her height, the way she carried herself, like a woman who had learned to stand alone. No one remembered. He walked the streets, peering into windows, scanning faces in the crowd. He saw merchants and fishermen and widows in black. He saw children running with loaves of bread, sailors stumbling from taverns, women with baskets of fish on their hips. He did not see her. The sun climbed higher. The heat grew heavy. The Duke of Ravencrest, dressed in the mud-stained clothes of a man who had ridden for 3 days without stopping, leaned against a stone wall and closed his eyes. He had failed. He had come all this way, and he had failed. He had spent 3 years waiting for courage, and when he finally found it, he had arrived too late. He opened his eyes, and she was standing in front of him. She had not changed, not in the ways that mattered. Her hair was longer, streaked with salt and sun. Her skin was darker, touched by wind and weather. Her clothes were plain, a simple dress, worn boots, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. But her eyes were the same. They looked at him with recognition, with surprise, with something he did not dare name. Alistair, she said. His name. She had said his name. Not the Duke, not Lord Ravencrest. His name. Margaret, he said. His voice cracked on the second syllable. She did not move toward him. She did not move away. She stood still, her hands at her sides, her face unreadable. You came, she said. I came. I did not think you would. I know. He took a step forward. She did not step back. I burned the letters, he said. Her eyes widened. Every single one. I burned them in the garden where your roses used to grow. I watched them turn to ash, and I realized that I had been hiding behind them for 3 years. What did you find? He swallowed. I found that I did not need them anymore. I had memorized every word. I had carried them in my heart. The letters were never the truth, they were the shadow of the truth. And what is the truth? He took another step. The truth. He had rehearsed it 100 times on the road. He had practiced the words until they felt like stones in his mouth. But now, standing in front of her, the words came without effort. The truth is that I loved you from the moment I saw you. I was too afraid to admit it. I was too broken to act on it. I spent 3 years hiding in silence, telling myself that I was protecting you when I was only protecting myself. She did not speak. The truth is that I have been a coward, and I am tired of being a coward. I am tired of waiting. I am tired of writing letters I never send. He stopped. He was close enough to touch her now. I am not asking you to come back to Ravencrest. I am not asking you to be the Duchess of Ashwood. I am asking you to let me be the man I should have been 3 years ago. She looked at him for a long, silent moment, and then she spoke. I do not know if I can trust you, Alistair, he nodded. I know. I have built a life here, a small life, a simple life. I have learned to be happy without you. I know, she paused, but I have not stopped loving you. His breath caught. I tried, she said. I tried to stop. I told myself that you did not deserve my love, that you had chosen silence over honesty, that you had let another woman walk into our wedding and destroy everything I believed in. She took a breath. But love does not follow reason. It does not follow justice. It simply is. She reached out. Her hand touched his cheek. I have been waiting for you to become the man who wrote those letters. I am him, he said. She smiled. It was not a full smile. It was small, tentative, still bruised by the years of silence. Then show me, she said. He took her hand, and for the first time in 3 years, the Duke of Ravencrest did not wait. He walked with her through the streets of the port town, past the fish market and the church and the inn where she had been living. They walked to the edge of the sea, where the waves crashed against the rocks and the salt spray misted their faces. He did not speak. He did not need to. He had spent his life hiding in words, burying his heart in letters, constructing elaborate confessions he was too afraid to deliver. Now he understood. Some truths are not meant to be written. Some truths are meant to be lived. He stood beside her at the edge of the sea, the wind whipping through his hair, the sun breaking through the clouds. She leaned into him. He did not let go. The waves crashed, the gulls called. The world continued its indifferent turning. But for the Duke of Ravencrest and the woman he had finally learned to love without fear, the world stood still. Some loves are not chosen. They are recognized. And sometimes recognition takes years. But it is never too late, because love, when it is real, does not wait. It simply stays. And in the end, that is the only truth that matters.